Point Blank is a tough thriller of violence and revenge.
We just hit him on the head and that's it?
Not as much as I thought.
We blew it.
Your friend Reese? He's in the big time now. He bought his way back in. With the money he stole from you. You want Reese? And I want the organization.
Lee Marvin stars in Point Blank, the Monday thriller, tonight at 9:25.
On BBC Two in about 20 minutes, Bob Monkhouse will be joined by Spike Milligan, Marvin Hamlish and comedian Rita Rudner. Here on BBC One now, Panorama.
Christmas in Bootle on Merseyside. When most of us are on our way home, Mrs. Margaret Kane is off to work as a cleaner. She's already one of Britain's lowest paid workers. Now, as a direct result of government policy, she's had to take a pay cut.
We've been asked to take a pay cut of 21 pence an hour. Well, I've never heard of anybody taking a pay cut before. Especially, you know, why take it out of us when we haven't got much? Why couldn't they have started with government people, MPs, and all the, you know, the top money people? Why us with nothing?
Good evening. How much do you earn? Are you one of the top money people that Mrs. Kane was talking about? Well, if you're the Lord Chief Justice, then you're earning £1,087 a week before tax. In January, that'll go up to £1,154 a week. Not making quite as much as that? Are you perhaps a company director? Average weekly salary, £385 plus perks. You've had a rise this year of 16%. What about a printer? Basic pay before overtime, £270, rather more than the average journalist. Or perhaps you're a checkout operator in a supermarket. If so, you'll be getting a basic wage of just £75 a week. It's people like that, people at the bottom of the wages league, that Panorama's concerned with tonight. In this report, published today, the low pay unit estimates that there are now 3.5 million workers being paid less than £100 a week, including overtime. Add in part-timers, and that's 6.5 million people working for less than £2.50 an hour. The report says that for the first time since the 30s, the fear of unemployment has brought actual cuts in the wages of many low-paid workers. And it goes on to claim that the government has actively encouraged this trend in the belief that wage cuts are the only solution to unemployment. Well, we'll be discussing that charge later in the programme. But first, we report on what is happening to the low-paid at Christmas 1983. Since the turn of the century, the only innovation in this artificial flower factory has been an electric motor to drive the venerable Victorian machinery. The painstaking techniques for creating exact replicas of real flowers are just as labour-intensive as they were 80 years ago. In Victorian times, this was a sweated trade where unchecked competition forced wages down to starvation level. And then the Ostrich and Fancy Feather and Artificial Flower Wages Council was introduced to guarantee to workers in this curious trade a minimum wage, which all employers were legally bound to pay. But that was long ago. Is wage protection today simply a museum piece? Has it now become, as the government says, an impediment to the economic revival of Britain?
Is there really a case for wages councils imposing minimum rates which frustrate market forces? To put it mildly, the answer to the question would appear to be no.
It's been said that the wages councils were got by public agitation out of moral indignation. 3/4 of a century ago, there were exhibitions of the products of sweaty trades all over Europe. In Britain, the government laid before the House of Commons an anti-sweating bill. The case for protecting the wages of the poor was put with passion and humanity by the President of the Board of Trade. His name, Winston Churchill.
It is a serious national evil that any class of His Majesty's subjects should receive less than a living wage in return for their utmost exertions. It was formerly supposed that the workings of the laws of supply and demand would naturally regulate or eliminate that evil. But whereas in what we call sweated trades, you have no parity of bargaining between employers and employed, where the good employer is continually undercut by the bad, and the bad again by the worse, there you have not a condition of progress, but a condition of progressive degeneration.
Please, Oleg, don't take it. Don't. You can't, don't take it, please.
When workers toil away in small back rooms in a highly competitive sector like the clothing industry, when they're immigrants or don't speak English very well, that's when they're vulnerable. That's when Churchill thought a wages council vital. Here, there's no parity of bargaining between employer and employed because the workers are not organised.
Tell me, yes. UCW? Well. Anyone else speak English?
Trying to win recruits for the union, Barney Schuster meets the small employers struggling in the garment jungle. What had happened without a wages council?
Well, that's the trouble. There's a lot of people who are not organised, would be kicked into the gutter. But quite literally. They'd be ripped off on wages because the employers could pay them anything.
And would that happen?
Oh, yes. You just have to look into the factories around here and talk to the employers, who themselves are under pressure from the suppliers, and they certainly would. Because, as one employer said to me, in order to survive in this game, you have to be a liar, a cheat, and a robber.
It's not always the smallest companies that are guilty of what is a criminal offence, paying below the Wage Council minimum rates. At Swingtone Limited, just off Brick Lane in London's East End, Panorama discovered that more than one worker was being paid less than the law says they're entitled to. We've been talking to a number of your workers. In connection with the story that we're doing, we have reason to think that some of them are not being paid the legal minimum rate, and we'd like to, well, could we just talk to you about it? Mrs. Lorraine Harris told us that if Swingtone had been underpaying, it was pure inadvertence, and in any case only applied to 3 of the 150 staff. May we speak to your staff to ask them whether they are being paid the rate? Could you explain why we may not speak to your staff?
Would you like us? I don't want to be on television. It's not good publicity.
But they might like to be on television.
But I couldn't care less. It's publicity for me, and I don't want that bad publicity.
Swingtone's workers were nervous about talking to us, but they confirmed that Swingtone had for several months been paying 14 pence below the minimum hourly rate of £1.50.
They told us that it was £1.36 and we said we think it's £1.50, and that was all that was said. And then after the union spoke to her again, she said that she would put all the money back up to £1.50 an hour.
They've said they'll put it right?
Yeah.
After we've been in today?
Yes. But it's not as if we're asking for things out of our league. We're only asking for what is rightly ours, what the government says we should get. We're not asking for big pay rises, things like that, no extras, just what we're entitled to.
Oh, yeah, we lose our bonuses.
What was that?
Our bonuses.
Christmas bonuses for talking to you.
Is that what the management said to you?
Yeah.
That you'd lose your Christmas bonuses?
Yeah.
What's that worth to you?
It's about
quite a lot.
£25. It's not a lot to you, but, you know.
The thing is that there are thousands of factories that are not registered at all with anyone. And so the inspectorate just doesn't know they exist until something like a fire or a tragedy takes place.
There are wages inspectors, but if you start a clothing factory, you have no obligation to tell them. And the government's cut their numbers by a third, from 177 to 120. On average, the inspector calls just once in 10 years. Have you been here before?
No.
Let's go and see. What would the minimum hourly pay that someone would make, though?
Something like £1 an hour.
Sorry?
£1 an hour.
£1 an hour. £1 an hour is what you reckon?
Who would that be for?
What kind of job would that be?
Journal job, you know,
Yeah.
because they're just piecing up, you know, from one to another land.
I see.
Right.
So that's the way. So it will depend on what we are made.
Right.
Something is easier than harder, you see.
So your wages would run from £1 an hour to what?
Well, £1 an hour or 80 pence, so it will depend on
80 pence?
Yeah. So it's go upward, you know. Sometimes I have to pay £2 to some certain job.
These clothing workers are being paid below the minimum adult rate, but the inspectors wouldn't want to know because none of these people are entitled to Wages Council protection. Now, the man in that workshop there is saying he pays some of his people £1 an hour, even 80p an hour. How can he get away with that?
Not covered by Wages Council. It's leather, you see, and he can pay what he likes.
You think those sort of rates would become the norm if Wages Councils were abolished?
In many centres of clothing, yes.
In the West Midlands, well-paid jobs in engineering are being replaced by badly paid ones in clothing factories. And because of the piecework system, workers in this Birmingham factory are being denied the pay they ought to be getting. And these are your pay slips here, are they?
Yeah.
So, I mean, just looking at them now, here's the sort of gross earnings. That one's 42.82. This one's 42. How many hours is this? This is a 5-day week, is it?
Yeah.
This is 42. So it's all round about the same thing. Here's one for 40. Have you any idea how much you ought to be earning for 40 hours?
I've been told about £50 to £60 a day.
I mean, at the moment you're getting about £1 an hour, right?
Mm.
Well, our calculation is that you ought to be getting £68.80. And in fact, you're getting 40. So you're being underpaid by half of what you earn at the moment. I mean, what's your reaction to that?
I need the money. Even though it's so little.
What do you feel about getting paid so badly?
Sometimes I go home and just cry. Can't do nothing else. Tell my boyfriend and he says, don't worry.
I mean, some people would say, well, you're young, it's only pin money.
No women who works in a clothing factory is doing it for pin money. The hours are terrible. The money is even worse. And talking to the gaffers about the money, you get nowhere at all. And I work because I need to. I have my family to look after and there's only me. And I've got all 4 children in school. So I need that money. I need that money because I work because I need that money.
At the Department of Employment, workers and employers' representatives gather for a Wages Council meeting. What they decide will determine the minimum rates of pay, which often turn out to be the maximum ones, for 500,000 shop workers throughout Britain. Altogether, getting on for 3 million people are covered by 26 Wages Councils. The union side regards them as a lifeline to the low-paid. The Wages Councils all have a chairman and 2 arbiters who have the casting vote. They're meant to be independent, but that hasn't stopped ministers leaning on them to cut proposed pay rises, as they successfully did last year.
Good morning. Please be seated.
The government complains that the Wage Council pay awards are inflationary, yet this year, while earnings are up 7.75%, the Wage Councils have settled for an average 5.9, exactly what this meeting agreed on.
Item number 3 on the agenda is notification on the date shown.
For an adult shop worker outside London, it'll mean a £4 rise from next April to £71.50 a week. Some employers think that far too generous a Christmas present.
I had been working from my home, but I got so very busy and it outgrew my home, and I thought I'd quite like workrooms and retail premises, so I got...
Pauline MacDonald runs a dressmaking business in Lincolnshire. When she took on an assistant, she didn't even realise she had to pay a Wage Council minimum rate. When she did find out, she simply ignored her legal obligations.
This is one of the workrooms where quite a lot of the work is carried on from.
When her employee eventually complained to the wages inspector, Mrs. MacDonald had to hand over £550 she'd illegally underpaid. She sees herself as the injured party.
I felt dreadfully upset. I felt more upset than anger, in actual fact, to think that someone who had worked for me for quite a long time, who I thought was my friend, who I thought was happy working for the amount of money that I was paying her, should suddenly do that.
But the fact is, you've been committing a criminal offence, and you've known you've been committing it.
That's right. So has a lot of other people, and they still are. Because you cannot afford to pay what the Wages Council say. Now I just have one girl working for me, and that is how it will stay.
Why?
Because I can't afford to pay what the Wages Council say. I'm turning work away because I just will not employ anybody else, and I'd rather turn work away than pay the high wages of the Wages Council.
Can't really call them high wages, can you?
Yes, they're very high.
£1.50 an hour, high wages?
Yes, I think so.
Surely the wages councils are there to set minimum rates to prevent employers like you exploiting their workers.
They are also stopping employers taking on employees, and they are also pushing up the dole queue. So they are really doing a lot more harm than good.
Small business people like Mrs. MacDonald are the Conservative hope for economic recovery. So when they insist that wages councils are pricing people out of jobs, the government listens. This is a file of confidential ministerial and civil service documents from inside the Department of Employment. They show that from the moment the Conservatives came to power in 1979, the future of the wages councils was in doubt.
I would like to consider whether these councils are the best way of dealing with low pay, whether they cover areas that should be covered if low pay is to be regulated, or whether they should be wound up or left to wither quietly away.
A few days later, it was decided that
an in-house study should be undertaken. It should have no publicity.
Other Conservative ministers now decided to get involved.
The Secretary of State for Industry,
Sir Keith Joseph,
and the Chief Secretary to the Treasury,
John Biffin,
expressed the view that wages councils were incompatible with the government's policy on pay determination. They proposed to the Secretary of State for Employment,
James Pryor,
that officials of all relevant departments should examine radical solutions for the future of wages councils.
The Secretary of State agreed.
Eventually, the interdepartmental report was considered by the Cabinet's Economic Committee. Contrary to what ministers often imply, it found
no evidence of any significant loss of employment directly attributable to the setting of minimum rates by wages councils.
Missing from the final report were some interesting sentences from the draft.
Ministers ought to be warned that without some kind of statutory minimum pay, wages for unorganised workers could fall to politically embarrassing levels.
So civil servants are worried at what would happen to the low paid without wage councils.
Good afternoon, Wages Inspectorate.
Before it can abolish the wages councils, the government must first repudiate an international convention. This it cannot do till 1985.
Just a minute, I'll check for you.
But while the government waits, the legal obligations imposed by the wages councils to protect the low paid are being flouted. Because of the shortage of inspectors, many of the 390,000 registered establishments in Britain are subject to no more than a paper inspection by postal questionnaire. In effect, firms are asked, are you underpaying your workers? Of the 23,000 establishments that the inspectors did actually visit, no less than 9,000, 4 out of every 10, were underpaying some of their already low-paid workers. Despite all this, criminal proceedings were taken in just 7 cases.
£44.50 for 40 hours.
Well, thanks very much for yet another early morning start. It's nice to see that so many people are interested in recruiting in an industry which is renowned for its low pay. In the hotel and catering industry, the definition of low pay is quite clear. It is a rate of pay on which people cannot afford to live.
At 6 in the morning, Jerry Tilston, the union organiser for London's hotel and catering workers, drives home the reality of life on low pay to shop stewards from better paid industries.
Now, the rates of pay on there, the statutory minimum rates of pay, are in London £64.80 before any deductions. So you can assume from that what one would end up with as a disposable income would be not a lot.
You just send it to the parents and join in. Okay. Well, thanks for your choice.
In an industry where only 7 out of 100 are in a union, the Wages Council ought to be playing the role Winston Churchill designed it for, protecting the rights of workers who are not sufficiently organised. Yet last year, more than half of all licensed hotels and restaurants inspected were paying someone below the legal rate.
Good morning.
The Vienna Hotels Group boasts 2,000 hotel beds in central London. Not all their employees are covered by Wages Council regulations because they're not all licensed. But the Norfolk Plaza Hotel is. As we discovered from Jackie and Suzanne Fraser, who've been working there for some months now, the hotel's been breaking the law by failing to pay many of its workers the legal minimum rate. And that's a complete record of all the timesheets you got?
Yes.
So the whole thing is there, the whole week's, all the hours you work?
Yeah.
Suzanne, you work part-time here at the Norfolk Plaza. What exactly do you do?
I'm a chambermaid.
And what about the hours you work?
I work from 10:30 to 2:30, 6 days a week.
So what is that in total?
27 hours a week.
27 hours. Well, now I've got those timesheets here, and I calculate that even paying you at the absolute minimum rate of £1.88 an hour, which is a minimum London rate, I calculate that you should be getting £52.85p a week. What actually are you earning?
£29.84.
And this is your pay slip here, is it?
Yes, this is last week's pay slip.
£29.84. Jackie, you're working full-time.
Yeah.
Now, I calculate that you should be getting £71.51, and that's allowing for deductions for meals, so I think you get breakfast, right?
Yeah, I get breakfast.
What do you actually get?
£62.
So that, again, is way below what you should be earning.
Yeah.
The girls are only entitled to a minimum wage because the hotel is licensed. 2 weeks ago, the management closed the bar. Eventually, one of the Vienna Group directors agreed to talk to us.
It's certainly not our policy to disobey the law.
But it's not a question of policy. If you don't pay the minimum rate, you're committing a criminal offence, aren't you?
That's correct.
Do you admit that that's what you've been doing?
We certainly have now to make corrections to ensure that we're within the law.
You've been paying below the rate?
Yes.
We've talked to Suzanne and Jackie Fraser, two of your employees. I've got some recent pay slips here. Now, Suzanne, who worked part-time, was being paid £29.84 for the hours she did. Have you any idea what she ought to have been paid?
Well, we have done some calculations in order to bring Suzanne's wages up to the correct level. I don't remember the figures offhand, but it was at the time understood that she was a living-in member of staff, so that her part-time rate also took into account a living-in deduction.
You're saying that if she'd been living in, you would have been paying her the right wage?
As it turns out, we were not paying the minimum rate for her particular status, but it was believed at the time that that was the correct rate for living in.
So, in fact, you were paying her below the rate, and you were also deducting a living-in allowance, which you had no right to do?
That's correct.
Haven't you tried to deal with management here on terms and conditions of service? Haven't you tried to say to them that you think you're being underpaid and badly treated?
They don't listen to us. They're always trying to evade the issue, and our managers had to make a phone call elsewhere to find out what we're entitled to and so forth. So we never get a straight answer.
Never?
No.
Meanwhile, you're working how many hours?
27.
27 hours for £29.84 gross. That's £1.11 an hour.
It's laughable, isn't it?
Would you not accept that the wages councils were set up to protect employees in the hotel business, for example, against employers like yourself from paying them below the rate?
That may well have been the criteria at the beginning.
But it's still the case. That's why they still exist.
If you say so.
Well, what do you feel about that?
Well, I feel that, as I've stated before, with a company of this type, inevitably, if it is faced with regulations which set a rate of pay which is economically not viable for the operation, obviously the numbers of staff are liable to be reduced.
Yeah, so we can't really even say that keeping production and rigid.
What would be the situation if employers no longer had to pay wage council rates?
Except really in the plastic bags industry.
The government asked these Cambridge economists to investigate what happened after some old wage councils were abolished.
Our study found no evidence of direct benefits from the abolition of wages councils. We found no evidence of any increase in economic efficiency, of any increase in total numbers of jobs in the industry, and yet at the same time there was significant evidence of an extension of low pay.
But economists disagree. From the heights of the City University Business School, Professor Michael Beanstalk maintains that a drastic 6% cut in wages would cut the dole queues in half. The Cambridge Group, which looked at what happened when some of the wage councils were abolished, said that there were no economic benefits, no new jobs, just more people on low pay.
Well, if that's true, my own view would be that the social security system is preventing real wage costs from falling among the low paid. And therefore, what we must do to create jobs among the low paid is to cut social security benefits.
So your complaint would be not that there were more people on low pay when the wages councils were abolished, but that there weren't enough on low pay.
That's right. That if you want to create jobs, the way you create them is by reducing their cost to employers, and that inevitably is going to take people off the dole queues onto what are defined as low pay. But that is how you get unemployment down among these wage groups.
We're obviously talking about a problem.
The low pay unit disagrees. Instead of abolishing the patchy protection offered by wages councils, they say a minimum wage should become every worker's right. Along with the TUC and the Council of Europe, they believe that the lowest rate should be set at 2/3 of average earnings.
We say that currently the minimum wage should be no less than £100 a week for full-time adult workers and, of course, the hourly equivalent for part-timers.
Surely we've got to compete with other countries who are paying lower wages. We've got to compete with that, haven't we?
Yes, of course we've got to compete, but we need to compete on the basis of efficiency, quality of product, design. If we try and compete on the basis of lower wages, we're not going to win in that competition unless we are prepared to accept third world wages, the sort of wages paid in Hong Kong or Taiwan. And I don't think most people in this country are prepared to see that situation.
The government believes that the market and not the wages council should determine the level of wages. But where it can intervene, it gives them a push downwards. 8 of these teenagers, 100,000 across the country, are on the Young Workers Scheme. Provided that they're paid less than £42 a week, their employers get a £15 reward from the taxpayer. You're on the Young Workers Scheme here?
Yeah.
How much do they pay you?
The gross pay is £35.
What do you think of that?
I think it's okay. I can manage on it.
Now, having done a year on the Young Workers Scheme, they said you could stay on here and you said yes. Why?
Well, nowhere else to go, really.
These teenagers have a job, however low paid, but is that because of the government subsidy? Independent research came up with a depressing finding that out of every 100 Young Workers Scheme jobs, only 6 had been created by the scheme. 4 were simply putting an adult out of work, the rest would have been there anyway. Even on the government's own figures, employers are mostly taking the money for what they'd be doing in any case.
We're taking that subsidy because it's been offered. All it gave us was, instead of taking 5 people on 6 weeks ago, we took 6. But we would have took that extra one on sooner or later anyway. After Christmas, we'll probably take some more people on anyway.
So what's your reaction when some people might say, you're growing rich, buying a Bentley, on cheap labour?
Then I say, if you don't want us to employ the people, stop the schemes, have more on the dole, pay more money for people doing nothing, have more people out of work, and let the country go down even faster. Our people are earning their own money eventually. As the firm improves, wages improve, everything improves. But if we don't get the help fair enough, perhaps we'll go back to working on the market. We earned our wage then. We didn't have to employ anybody.
I think what the government is trying to do, basically, is to lower the wage in the economy as a whole, lower average wages. And they're doing this by hitting at those groups who are probably most vulnerable. On the one hand, we're going to have a group of low-paid individuals doing jobs which are basically not very attractive, which are physically demanding and don't have good promotion prospects, and another group who are the higher-paid people with good career structures, with attractive jobs, and that the gap between these two groups will widen, making Britain even more of a two-nation culture than it already is.
The government's own figures show very clearly how the relationship between the high-paid and the low-paid has changed since the Conservatives came to power. If you draw a straight line to represent the average incomes of men since 1979, then this is what has happened to the top wage earners. They're 8% better off now, compared with the average, than they were 4 years ago. But the experience of people at the bottom of the wages league is very different. They are now 3% worse off than they were. Under the Conservative government, the earnings gap between the well-paid and the low-paid has grown wider. In July this year, the Treasury acted to increase that earnings gap. Announcing the rescission of the Fair Wages Resolution, the Treasury told the companies that did its contract cleaning that cleaners on government cleaning contracts will no longer be guaranteed a minimum level of pay. It is now up to individual government departments to negotiate new contracts which will intentionally cut the pay of cleaners who are already among the worst paid of low-paid workers. Just before dawn, Edith Hewitson goes into battle. A year ago, Mrs. Hewitson's cleaning job at Woolwich Barracks was privatised. When she went to work for the company that got the contract, she lost her paid holidays. Now the Treasury edict means that her actual rates of pay are under attack. The great protection of the standard of life of the mass of the wage-earning classes. That was how Harold Macmillan saw the Fair Wages Resolution, as a shield against some future Treasury economy drive. Now that moment has come, but the resolution is no longer there. The cleaners are defenceless.
You're going back to slave labouring. I mean, they do a very good job now, and it is hard work. I mean, to come out and to clean for everybody else. And it's just, well, it will be, as far as I'm concerned, slave labour. There'll be some people that'll have to take it because there is nothing else and they are desperate for money. And then you're going to find that they're going to not tell the Social Security if they're drawing Social Security. They're going to try and moonlight. I mean, it's all right, these people in these big top jobs in civil service sitting behind a desk, they don't do the cleaning and they don't do the grafting. And my opinion is that you just don't know what they're talking about. They want to try to come and try and do it.
They aren't being asked to take a pay cut either.
No, they're not. They're not being asked to take a pay cut. Whereas way down here, I mean, getting up early in the morning, coming out to work, we've got the rough end of the stick. And again, once again, the cleaners are now going to have to take the rough end again by taking a pay cut.
In Woolwich, they're awaiting pay cuts. On Merseyside, the Inland Revenue has already acted. Margaret Kane and her fellow cleaners have seen the contract companies they work for cut their pay by 12%, from £1.71 an hour to £1.50. And there's no wages council here to prevent further cuts. The government refused to have one.
They think that they're going to create more jobs and help people, but they're not. They're hindering people every time. Really, all the government are interested in is getting the cheapest contract. It doesn't matter about the people who are actually doing the work. They're not interested in that. All they're interested in is getting the cheapest contract.
The last thing we really want to do is to cut wages of our cleaners. But in this particular case, we were faced with no alternative. The only other alternative was actually to say to them, I'm sorry, you don't have a job anymore. What could we do?
Even the contract cleaning bosses want a minimum wage. Without it, they fear that competition will drive pay rates down to levels that will utterly discredit privatisation.
Does the government really want to hit the lowest paid part of the labour force at a time when, in fact, it isn't even helping to increase the jobs in that particular sector of the industry?
How low could wages go?
I don't know. I'm appalled at the fact that they can just go down and down and down.
What is wrong with government making you compete?
If you start to compete simply on wages, then you're attracting the wrong kind of contractor into the industry. We're going to go back 15, 20 years where the contract cleaning industry was full of cowboys, there were very little standards around, there was no codes of practice. These have all come in over the last 10 years. We want to maintain the codes of practice, we want to maintain the standards. And you don't do it by simply competing on wages and wages alone.
A couple of weeks after we got the pay cut, we read about John Gummer getting a £5,000 a year rise.
That's the Minister in the Department of Employment?
Yeah. He got the rise and he had no extra responsibilities or anything. To us, it seemed for nothing, you know, and that disgusted us, didn't it?
Yes, it really did.
That disgusted us.
Because it's always the higher people that seem to benefit, and it's always the lower paid that don't, that always seem to miss out.
If the government are going to do cuts, surely they should cut from the people who can afford to be reduced. You know, the people with more money, rather than the people with practically no money, like ourselves. You know.
The low-paid go to work at unfashionable hours to unglamorous jobs. Can it really be that the economic recovery of Britain depends on hotel chambermaids working for less pay than they already do, on young workers doing adult jobs for less than £1 an hour, on cleaning ladies taking pay cuts from the politicians whose offices they clean? Is it really fair that the government's policy to create new jobs turns out in practice to mean a pay cut for the poor?
I do not want to see impaired the vigor of competition, but we can do much to mitigate the consequences of failure. We want to draw a line below which we will not allow persons to live and labor, yet above which they may compete with all the strength of their manhood. We want to have free competition upwards. We decline to allow free competition to run downwards.
Sir Winston Churchill there, arguing that vigorous economic competition must not be allowed to drive wages down below a certain level. Walter Goldsmith, do you agree with Sir Winston there? Should we draw a line below which we will simply not allow people to labour?
I think it's right that we should draw a line below which people in society do not sink when they cannot afford services. And I know it's difficult to have to generalise, but I just like to make the position clear from an employer's point of view. The sort of society that we want to see is not a low-pay society. We are one of the lowest paid countries in the industrialised world. But the film didn't say why. The film didn't talk about low productivity in this country. It didn't talk about declining industries.
No, it's about
It didn't
low
talk
pay.
about competition. It was about purely low pay. I think that the answer is not low pay. What we want is a high pay, high productivity, low unit labour cost
But let me be
society.
entirely clear for the moment. That may be your aim, but for the moment, do you say that we should draw a line below which pay must not be allowed to fall, or do you say it must find its own level?
I think it should find its own level, because to draw that line will deny a very large number of people, particularly young people, jobs. What we should seek to do is to give people the opportunity to increase their pay, and substantially, but directly related to their performance, directly related to productivity, directly related to removing restrictive practices. In other words, let's give people a vision of how they can raise their pay. Now, this may mean that some low-pay industries are just not appropriate to this country.
Well, now,
some of the textile industries, for example, are probably more appropriate in some respects to developing countries, and let those developing countries develop using high labour intensity industries.
Well,
we have to
I
develop
must
new
interrupt you
industries.
there. However much you look to the future, you say you're prepared to let low pay fall. Now, Frank Field, you were formerly director of the
May I
low
come
pay
back?
unit.
I must
In a
correct
moment,
that,
if
because
you,
I didn't
if
say
you may,
let
but
low pay fall.
You
I
have said let it reach market forces.
Let employment rise.
Can I
Yes,
can I
Frank.
actually comment? Because it seems that Walter Goldsmith was saying two things. One was that he wants us to be a high-paying economy, and there's going to be no disagreement around the table on that. But rather strangely, that he thought his route to that was to cut wages. I'd concentrate on what you said at the very beginning, Walter. You seem to be distancing yourself from some of the horrors we saw in that film, and I think most of us would actually do that. But let me disagree with you when you say we should let the market decide, because I believe that's wrong. If you take us as a community, over the centuries we've built up by conventions or by law an improvement in our standards, and I think that applies in the wages areas as in other areas. Economists then have a job of telling us what's going to be the consequences if you implement that policy. And whereas Walter did pick on the clothing industry, what I thought was misleading about your film was that a lot of people at home could sit very comfortably and say those wretched employers, and I mean George is going to come in a minute and I'm sure rightly put the responsibility. But the biggest employer of the low-paid are the community, both through government and local authorities. So all of us have a responsibility in having people sweated in our community.
All right, well, can I come back to that? John Townend, you're in business yourself, you run a licensed hotel. How far would you let wages fall?
Well, I think the whole question is, which is the greater problem, low pay or high unemployment? And the reason I oppose wages councils is because they take no notice at all of the employer's ability to pay. They take no account of the labour market in a particular area. And therefore, where they fix wages above market clearing rate, they inevitably destroy jobs.
But we saw the evidence there, and indeed it was evidence from inside government, that the wage council minimum levels were not a bar to employment.
Well,
don't you accept that?
That is not true. In my constituency of Bridlington, where we have a lot of small hotels, where we have a lot of the retail trade, people will not take on young people.
Well, how far should these wages fall?
Can I just say this? A young person at 17-year-old, without any experience, without any training, without any skill, without any motivation, the minimum wage is £51 a week, and at 19 it's £71 a week. I can tell you in the Bridlington constituency, in wage councils industries, they are not taking on young people, and therefore it is hitting the young, it is hitting the unskilled, and it is hitting those who aren't motivated.
Right. George Lawson, you spent your time arguing the case for better minimum rates. Now, we saw in that film a girl there, she was a school leaver. She was being paid on the Young Workers Scheme, a scheme designed to keep wages down, £35 a week. She said she was perfectly happy with that. What is wrong with wages of that kind? What is wrong with someone of that age being paid a low wage?
Well, she's placed in great risk in real terms. It'll not be too many years before she herself is an adult worker being replaced by a youth worker on some youth worker scheme. And in that sense, these schemes have proven to be extremely dangerous to adult workers, let alone exploiting the situation for young workers.
But if she's prepared to work for that wage, she even said she was perfectly happy with it. She could manage on it. What's wrong with that?
Well, if she's
certainly helping that company.
If she's working in a workplace such as a checkout girl in a supermarket, and she's been in there 2 days on a fairly low-skilled job, being trained to that machine, she will be as productive as any other worker inside that establishment. And, in my view, deserves the rate for the job. She is contributing to the profitability and the sales department of that particular store. The same thing if you took a young worker into a kitchen in a hotel. As a kitchen porter, within 3 days the routine has been learned. They're entitled to the rate for the job.
Now, would you say, John Townend, can I come back to you? You saw there Professor Beanstalk saying that the problem, really, if you abolish wages council, was not that you had some low-paid people, but that you didn't have enough low-paid people. Would you share that view?
What I certainly do think is that at this stage in our economic situation, it's far better to have several 100,000 more low-paid jobs than no jobs at all. Now, I agree with Walter that it's society's responsibility to see that people don't fall below a certain level.
And that's why we have
the family income supplement to help those on families, with housing rebates, with rate rebates, and now the housing benefit, and with social security benefits. And I think the point is that if you don't allow the market to work, an employer who can't afford to pay the wages has to shut down and people lose their jobs. And at the present time, even if employees are prepared to take a lower wage to keep their jobs, they're not allowed to do so under the law.
But then that is not true, is it?
That is true.
If we take the situation in hotels, the outturned profits of the Italian industry in Great Britain are higher by proportion than those in the manufacturing sector where wages are higher still. And yet low pay persists in the Italian catering industry. Now, of course, it's a classical relationship, pay low wages and have high profits. Now, what you're saying is drive down those wages even further, and if you do that, you immediately, by an indirect subsidy, increase the burden for the taxpayer, because he'll be making up the wages of Charles Fortey's employees from £61 to, let's say, a DHSS notional figure of £84 for man, wife and 2 children.
How does it help us if employers pay low wages, and we as taxpayers have to pay people more than social security.
Because if we create more jobs, we're paying less out in unemployment pay. But if I may say so, you proved the case against wages councils because you generalised. And of course the Savoy Hotel is making big profits and can afford to pay big wages. But there's many small hotels in the seaside who only have 4 or 5 months season who are actually on the breadline. And I know some of those hotels have gone out of business. Others, if they could pay the market rate, would certainly take on more staff. And that would certainly help my constituents.
Can I take up this pin money point? I think the point is made here that a lot of people could be paid on social security. A lot of people here, perhaps we saw someone in our film, may not be the main breadwinner of the family. Even though some people, as we saw in the film, are supporting families on their own, the vast majority of people earning low wages are not, are they? They're young people or they're married women. They are not the main breadwinner.
There are two questions here. One is the biggest single cause of poverty amongst people who are not pensioners are those who earn their poverty. That's got to be registered, and just how low these wages are we got from the film. So that's an important point. But you see, John Townsend says that we've really got to drive down wages so that we can get more jobs. Well, you showed in part of that film, the graph, where in fact the gap between the rich and the poor was widening, and yet during this period of time we've had more unemployment and not less unemployment. So I just wonder whether we could take the argument on a little bit, because there was something else in that film which was very important. You'd got people saying that they were quite openly breaking the law. And what I'd like to ask the other side of the table is, do they agree that, do they support those lawbreakers? Is that a proper policy to follow or not?
Walter Goldsmith.
I think what the government is doing is casting a blind eye at those who are in effect breaking the law.
What is your reaction?
Because my reaction to it is...
They won't cast a blind eye.
No, can we have Mr. Goldsmith's reaction?
My reaction to it is that if the government were able to, it would change the law. It has a long-term convention. It has actually decided that it will not enforce the law, because by doing so, it would put a lot of people out of work. Now, I must say I have some sympathy towards that, because I do not regard the government as being at all irresponsible in taking that attitude.
In not enforcing the law. How do you feel about that, Mr. Tanner?
Well, certainly they are enforcing the law, but it depends on the degree. But certainly
they can't be enforcing the law when 4 out of 10 employers are breaking it.
Well, they are. I mean, there are inspectors. It's a question of argument as to how many there are. But what I would say, that people who are breaking the law should not break the law, and you can't be selective on the laws you obey.
You wouldn't support Mrs. MacDonald?
No, I think it's a bad law, but I'm working to get the law changed. And I think that employers should obey the laws.
How really worrying this point is, because what Walter Goldsmith is saying is that really the law's wrong and therefore it's all right if people break it. Now, Mrs. Thatcher said about Warrington that was wrong. Absolutely. You actually wait to get a government that will change the law. You abide by the law. And what we do get from this government, and it is very worrying, I think, as a law-abiding citizen, there seems to be a law for some people and another morality for other people. And Walter Goldsmith said you just
you
have a blind eye to those people who are not paying the minimum rates by law, and you said that you agreed with that.
The law is there to be used as a last resort, and it was used by an employer in the case of Warrington. But in the case of whether someone is able to work or not, I think the government is justified in not enforcing a law which it is entitled to enforce at any time it wishes. I happen to believe that there is some justification in that, because it means that people will work who wouldn't otherwise work. I respect that.
Now, could I just ask you this question? There does seem to be some slight disparity. There are 119 wages inspectors and 2,100 social security fraud inspectors. Yes. Does that seem a slight disparity to you?
Being cut.
It is a manifestation of the government's decision not to enforce a law which would put, in particular, young people out of work.
Well, now, can I ask you this? We're coming to the end now. Do you feel that the gap between the low-paid and the better-paid is going to go on increasing? Your own directors, the most successful of them this year, have seen their pay go up by 36%. We've seen that the low-pay are even lower-paid now. Do you expect that gap to increase, and are you happy about that?
To pursue the sort of society we want, where people are able to earn more in relation to their efforts, we need the very best business leadership that we can possibly get. And we also need higher differentials so that people are encouraged to train. Since this is a country where everybody does have the opportunity to get towards the top, I have no objection to there being more and more incentive for them to do so. But
and there, I'm afraid, we must all stop. Thank you very much indeed. You may just like to know what's happened to the people in our film who were being underpaid. The girls at the Norfolk Plaza Hotel are now being paid at the correct rate, and they've been told they'll get their back pay before Christmas. And at Swingtone, the clothing factory, everyone is now being paid at least the legal minimum. Management say they'll be paying Christmas bonuses to everyone. They never intended to do anything else. We'll be back later in January, but before then, there's a panorama special about the children American GIs fathered and then abandoned in Vietnam. We'll be following a US soldier back to Saigon to find the child he last saw as a baby 15 years ago. Children of the Dust, a panorama special, is on January the 9th on BBC One. Meanwhile, from all of us here to the low-paid and to the well-paid, a very happy Christmas. Good night.
In 25 minutes, though.
Our early evening film on Boxing Day on 2 is the screen version of the musical Mame, starring Lucille Ball as the unconventional globe-trotting aunt. Tomorrow at 5:25.
Christmas Day on BBC Two. The Marx Brothers provide late-night laughs with duck soup.
You know, I'd be lost without a telephone.
The Marx Brothers in Duck Soup tonight at 11 o'clock. Christmas Day on BBC Two.
On BBC One shortly, Songs of Praise special for Christmas Day comes from Peterborough Cathedral. Viewers to BBC Scotland have carols for Christmas. While on 2 we examine the various ways in which our wildlife survives the winter days in the natural world.